So this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old, over a decade ago, and I still remember it vividly. At the time, I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, dad, and sibling. It was decently sized, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second grass. The third was also grass and had my trampoline on it. At the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning, I woke up to a cracking sound, like a snapping branch, and I was worried since a week earlier, a tree from the embankment had fallen onto our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the garden. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black clothing. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtains move. He started smirking and moved his finger as a "come here" motion. I totally freaked out and shouted for my mom and dad to come into my room. I was so scared, I physically felt like I couldn't move. It was super early in the morning, by the way, around maybe 5 a.m. So it took my dad a good 30 seconds to get in my room, which at that point, the stranger had hid behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up. I was crying while telling my dad what happened. He went out to the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was gone by that point. A bit of time passed and I started to forget about it. Then, about 3 months after, my mom and I were watching TV together after I finished school. The doorbell rang and my mom went to answer the door. I looked out the window from the living room where we were sat and saw a white van parked outside. It was the same van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway to say hi to him. When I got to the porch where my mom was stood, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden a few months prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom and gave me that same smirk as he did when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was just freaking out inside. Anyway, he just asked my mom if she wanted work done on the driveway. She said no and he left, got back in his van and drove off. I told my mom that it was the same guy as soon as he went, and she started to feel uneasy about the situation too. A month or so after that, I got my first job doing the paper round. I had to deliver over 300 papers with my best friend at the time. It was getting towards winter, so it was dark by 4:30 p.m. We'd been doing the job together for around a month, when one evening after school it was super dark and rainy. We went halfway through delivering the newspapers and a van started following us, driving real slow, at the same pace we were walking. We clocked that he was following us after about a minute and we started to panic. I noticed it was the same guy again. We left the newspaper trolley and started walking quite fast up the hill. We were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line with her while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop that we were about a minute away from. When we made it to the shop, the van sped off really fast. The police were called, who came to my house for a report. We told them everything. That was the last time I ever saw the creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. Okay, I should start this story by giving a bit of background so that you understand the situation a bit better. At the time of this story, I, a 4'9", 16-year-old female, had 2 dogs. The pair were brothers from the same litter. Now, being boxers, they were relatively big and quite protective when need be. Vince was longer and much taller than his brother, and is usually the kind to sleep through a hurricane if we had one. His brother Maury was shorter but more muscular and stronger. Usually, these two were with me 24/7, as my mother used to work a lot and I was usually alone most of the day, sometimes even until after dark. This never really bothered me. I'd been left alone at home like this since I was 11. It never struck me that I had a reason to be worried. One day that my mom was working later, I was doing some household chores, feeding the dogs, doing dishes, stuff like that. I continued doing what I always had, a routine of tidying up the house I had done every day for years. As I went to take the trash out of the bin, I started walking towards the door when Maury stepped in front of me. I tried moving around him, telling him to get out of the way and sort, but he refused to budge. This was certainly odd, and looking back on it now a few years later, I realize he was probably trying to stop me from walking outside. We continued like this for a few moments, me trying to get past him, and him, of course, not moving from his spot. As a big dog, he was quite heavy. It was difficult to lift him, and even harder for me to get him to move away from something. In the time Maury and I had been going back and forth with this interaction, Vince stayed happily asleep in his dog bed. I should note that from my kitchen, you can see the living room and bathroom. Usually, we used the side door from the kitchen to enter and exit the house since it's attached to the carport. After a couple more minutes, I heard something I hadn't expected. As I made one last desperate attempt to move Maury from his spot, he growled, which wasn't unusual as he growled plenty of his life. However, what was unusual was that he had growled at me. He had never done that before, not once. But for that reason, and that reason alone, I decided not to take the trash out that night. I simply tossed it in another room and left it there. A short time passed, maybe half an hour or so. I got settled into my chair to watch a movie while I waited for my mom to come home. While I was watching the movie, I suddenly heard a quiet knock at the side door. As I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see the living room from the kitchen, so I heard the knock pretty well. It was already after dark, so I figured it was just my mother and she had somehow forgot her keys. I got up, went into the kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the hook near the door. The keys weren't there. To some people, that's probably not that big of a deal, but to me, it meant the person knocking on my door was in fact not my mother. My mom is a bit of a routine-obsessed person, so if she had actually forgotten her keys, they would always be on the hook. I took a breath, preparing myself to just not answer the door, or if they didn't leave, to just tell them I wasn't interested in whatever was happening and that they should leave. Thinking about it now, I really wish I hadn't even looked out the window on the door. I wish I had just sat back down, called my mom, and stayed out of sight. But of course, I walked in front of the door and immediately came face to face with a figure on the other side of the window. Now, it was really dark out, with just my neighbor's light shining from his porch, so I could only make out a couple of things on this guy. He was tall. I had to peer up at him just to look at his face through the window. He had long hair that looked like a shadow over his shoulders in the dim light, but the only facial feature I could really see were his eyes. God, I wish I hadn't seen them. I could see sparks of interest flare up at them as he perked up when he saw me. They were wide and staring down at me. He took a step towards my door, stepping up the first of 2 steps. I heard him saying something along the lines of, "My car broke down nearby. Could I come in and use your phone?" Immediately, I thought of every bad thing that I had ever heard happening to a teenager home alone and tried to compose my nerves. I'm not sure what it was, but something told me not to trust this man standing on the other side outside of my door. I shouted back a quick no and an apology, hoping he was telling the truth and he would just go over to the next house. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said it again, quite a bit louder. I thought for a quick moment he hadn't heard me again, but I now know he most likely had. So instead I became more confident. "I'm sorry, I can't help you. Go to the next house," I shouted louder. For a moment he paused, as if contemplating what to do next. Then he knocked again, louder than the first time I'd heard it. My heart rate increased as I stared at him. When I didn't react, he started loudly banging against the door. I took a step back, praying to whatever god that he would either leave or my mom would be home early. I was usually a quiet girl, but my mom was a badass redneck with a raptor knife. She could take him. He started to bang on the glass after a moment, my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. Should I hide? Run? My phone was in the other room, and I was scared to take my eyes off the guy. I was sure he would break through the glass eventually. The banging was vibrating my eardrums, and apparently it was vibrating Maury's too. I saw him creeping up past the doorway, bending his head, teeth bared. He loudly started to bark. The man stopped for a moment, trying to see the floor through the window where Maury stood. When Maury stopped barking, the guy mistakenly tried to jiggle the door handle. Now that's when Vince woke up. I swear to God, for a dog dead asleep 5 seconds prior, I'd never seen him move that fast. Ever. In only 2 seconds, Vince had his paws up on the door, growling at the man like a hellhound at the devil's side. The guy jumped, falling back and bolting off. I heard him say something as he started to run, and I saw another shadow. My mom came home shortly after I had sprinted across my carport to my neighbor's. We called the police, and I explained what had happened, and my neighbor had dragged his shotgun out before they even got there. He had insisted on looking for the guy. The police had said someone tried to pick the lock on my front door, but there was a lot of stuff in front of it and it was really old, so it didn't open anymore. I went to bed that night uneasy and so very thankful I had 2 dogs who were not only strong and big, but one was very vigilant and the other one could practically kill if you let him. A few weeks went by and we hadn't heard from the cops, so eventually I tried to stop thinking about it. Another month went by, and although I was a bit scared of being home alone, nothing else seemed to happen. Then we got another call from the cops. What they told me made my heart sink in my chest and still gives me chills to this day. They had caught the guys and realized they were stalking me. Yes, guys, plural. There were 2 guys that had apparently been stalking me without my knowledge for months. They had several photos of me with words they had written all over them. Awful words. The police had been adamant that I changed my locks since they caught 2 guys and there was evidence of a 3rd. We moved shortly after that. I still pass by that house sometimes when I go to visit friends or do stuff around that area. A chill runs down my spine every time I do. To think that they never caught one of the guys was scary enough. The fact that they tried to break into my house was worse, not to mention that I hadn't even known they were watching me. I still think about it even now a few years later. I dread what would have happened if my dogs weren't there. I dread even more what they had planned if they would have opened the door and successfully broken in. I suppose they weren't expecting my dogs since our backyard is fenced, and they mostly stayed indoors since it was so hot where I lived. I thank the universe every day that I had them, especially now. After that, my mom never worked after dark again, which in all honesty was fine with me. So, to the man they still haven't caught, let's not meet. Hello, chill and thrill seekers. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing.